Hey, it's your old pal Victor here to present the anatomy and direction of blood flow of the heart. We all have one, and I'm here to talk about that with my group members, Janelle Brown and Vanessa Nicole. Specifically, where I want to start is I kind of want to get a little introduction on references in the culture to the heart. I thought that would be pretty cool. And what better way to get a nice little taste of the culture than to sample some music from several genres. So what I've done is I've collected a few different genres of music that mention the heart by name in their songs, and I'd like to play that for you. Where I sampled from was I got an alternative band called Rooney with their song When Did Your Heart Go Missing. I got a nice pop song with Selena Gomez, The Heart Wants What It Wants, pretty obvious in the title. I got a nice old rock song by Papa Roach called Scars. And lastly, I ended out with a sort of hip-hop, pop-ish song by Nicki Minaj called Super Bass. So without further ado, why don't we jump into this? Let's listen to it. I apologize for the audio quality of this particular portion, but limitations of software mean that I have to play the music through my speakers to the microphone. Anyways, you don't care about that. Let's do this. So.
Sold myself shut. My weakness is that I can't do much. Oh, you got my heart beat running away, beating like a drum and it's coming away. Can't you hear that?
Okay, so I'd like you all to take a moment to reflect on those songs a little bit, what you heard, where they reference heart in the lyrics. Think about what context that they reference heart in, as well as thinking about, different songs that you might know about, or even stories or films, because as you'll see on this next slide here, the heart is quite the tool for expression. It's a uniting human experience. As I said earlier in this presentation, for the most part, every human has a heart. There might be a literary term where they say, oh, that person's heartless. That might mean a lack of emotion or whatnot. But the actual organ, the heart, beats within mostly every living human being. I say mostly because there could be some random exception of somebody with a false heart. But still, they have some kind of pumping mechanism to get the blood around the body. Hearts are used as a tool for expression in countless movies, books, songs. They convey things ranging from emotions that are positive, negative emotions, and mainly because the heart, in terms of the human experience, is very deeply involved in our stress responses, our responses to the stimuli from our environment that cause us to go into stress states. Now, whether that's positive, you're very happy, you're excited, your heart will, start to beat a bit quicker, or if you're in a state of fear, your heart will also beat quicker. If you're in a state of depression or sadness, your heart will be affected. That there's a large nerve by your heart called the vagus nerve, which will cause that sort of lump in your throat and that pain you feel in your chest, that physical pain, which is actually your heart kind of going through the stress response with your body. So the heart is inseparable in that sense from the human experience, which is why we use it in a lot of our media and literature. Let's talk about where the heart came from a little bit. I'm not going to go into prehistoric animals and fossils. What I thought would be better would be if we talked about other organisms that we're all familiar with and how their heart is similar to ours, albeit a little bit more primitive in some senses. We'll start off with the frog. As you can see here, I have a nice little frog picture there. Above it is a little illustration of its heart, pretty simple. What it has is it has a three-chambered heart, so it has two atria and a ventricle below it. What that means is that it gets some deoxygenated blood from the body over here, oxygenated blood from the lungs over here. They go down here and they mix and they get pumped out. So the frog itself gets partially oxygenated blood running through its body, which isn't the most efficient mechanism, but it does work for this organism. As you can see, the lizard has a very similar heart makeup. Three chambers to the heart, and the same kind of anatomy, same kind of deal, mixed oxygenated blood running through. The turtle is where we start to see this little septum or wall right here forming. That's just starting to separate this large chamber right here called the ventricle, and the point of that is to deliver more richly oxygenated blood through the turtle's body. That little wall right there is going to prevent as much blood mixing from occurring. As we get into birds and mammals, like the chicken and the mouse, we see that there's this well-defined wall or septum right here in the ventricle, dividing it into two separate ventricles, which prevents blood mixing. And so you're not going to have oxygenated blood from the lungs mixing with deoxygenated blood from the body. What that benefits this organism is that it gets probably the most efficient, rich, oxygenated blood running through its body so it can function well. Going on to the human, it's basically, it doesn't look larger here, but it's a larger version of these two hearts in terms of its chambers and anatomy, which we'll get into in much more detail as this presentation goes on. I just wanted to illustrate kind of the progress you can see here as hearts got more efficient at delivering oxygenated blood to the body. Some fun facts I wanted to tell you about the heart before we get too deep into the human heart. Let's go into the animal kingdom a little bit. Did you know that earthworms have 5 pseudohearts that contract and pump blood through the body? They don't exactly have muscular contractions, they use a different mechanism, but it is neat that if you were to break an earthworm's heart, you shouldn't have to worry too much about it. They have 4 more waiting. Cockroaches, they're tough creatures, supposedly can survive nuclear wars and things like that. They actually have hearts with 12 to 13 chambers. You know, they're segmented hearts with several sets of cardiac muscles that act as a failsafe against heart failure. So in that sense, you could say their heart is even more resilient and efficient than the human heart. Cuttlefish actually have 3 hearts in their body. They have a heart at each of their set of gills, and they have a heart that functions the rest of the body, which is pretty cool because they're already a pretty unique creature, so having 3 hearts just adds to that whole thing. Lastly, hummingbirds, they fly around very rapidly. You've seen it, you could hardly even see their wings move, if at all, unless it's slowed down. They have heart rates that can be recorded at up to 21 beats per second. Humans don't really measure their heart rates in beats per second, we measure them in more beats per minute. And in human terms, if you have a heart rate of 21 beats per second, that converts to around 1,260 beats per minute, which is astronomical, seeing as the average human heart rate will typically be between 60 and 90 beats per minute. So, that has been a little introduction to the heart, hopefully grabbed your attention a little bit there. For the remainder of the lesson, we're going to be going into the anatomy of the human heart. We're going to talk about the direction that the blood flows through the heart. We're going to get into a little assessment of your knowledge, a few activities there. We're going to have a class activity after the conclusion of this video, and we'll work on a final worksheet to check for your understanding at the end. I hope you enjoy the rest of the lesson, and I pass this on to Janelle.
Hello class, for today's lesson I'm going to be teaching you about the heart. The objectives for the day are as follows. So by the end of the lesson you guys will know the different parts of the heart and their associated blood vessels and what their function is in relation to blood circulation. You'll also be learning how to trace the pathway of blood throughout the heart. So, to introduce you to the cardiovascular system in the heart, our cardiovascular system is, the main job of it is to deliver oxygen and nutrients to the cells of the body and the body tissues. So we break down the cardiovascular system in 2 ways. We have the heart, which is basically like our pump, and then we have the blood vessels, which is going to be like our fuel line and our transportation network. It's how we're going to get the blood out to the rest of the body. So we have 3 different types of blood vessels. You have arteries, you have veins, and you have capillaries. We typically tend to associate arteries with the color red because they have what we call oxygenated blood. Oxygenated blood simply means that we put oxygen into it. So artery vessels are going to be vessels that carry oxygenated blood away from the heart. And then you have veins, which carry deoxygenated blood, so it's the opposite of oxygenated, so that means that it doesn't have any oxygen in it, and we associate that with the color blue. So the veins are a little thinner than they are in the arteries, and they carry blood to the heart. So it does the opposite of what the arteries does. And then lastly, you have capillaries. Capillaries is where the exchange happens. So when we're trying to deliver some oxygen or some nutrients to body tissues, there's capillaries there where that exchange happens. So here, as you can see, like we said before, arteries are really huge because they have to do the job of making sure all of that blood gets pumped through the rest of the body. And then you have veins, which are slightly smaller, but it's coming from the body to the heart. So it doesn't have to be as big. And then capillaries are a lot smaller because there's so many of them, because we have so many exchange sites because there's different parts of our body tissues and everything. So we need a really large network. And so the capillaries are very small, and that's where all the exchange for the oxygen and the nutrients happens. So now we're going to get into the anatomy of the heart. So now I'm going to be teaching you about the superior and inferior vena cava, the right and left atriums, all the major valves of the heart, the right and left ventricles, as well as the lungs and the aorta. These are all the different parts of the heart that contribute to blood circulation. So we're going to begin with the superior and inferior vena cava. The superior and inferior vena cava are right here. You have one at the top, one at the bottom. And as you can see, it's color-coded blue because it's carrying deoxygenated blood. So that means it doesn't have any oxygen in it. But when we get our blood, it enters through these two cavities at the same time. And then it's going to apply it. All that blood has a lot of pressure behind it. So that's what's going to help it get through the rest of the 4 chambers of the heart, as we're going to discuss in the next slide. So our heart has 4 different chambers. You have the right atrium here, the right ventricle, the left atrium, and the left ventricle. So once it comes through the superior and inferior vena cava, all that pressure is going to help it pump through these 4 different chambers until it basically gets oxygenated and we can pump it all the way through the rest of the body. So it's got to have a lot of pressure in order to be able to get through all these 4 chambers and still get to the rest of the body. So our heart has 4 major valves that are between our 4 different chambers. So first you have your tricuspid valve, which is the valve that's between the right atrium and the right ventricle. Then you have your pulmonary valve, which is between your right ventricle and your pulmonary artery. The mitral valve is between the left atrium and the left ventricle, and your aortic valve is between the left atrium and the aorta. So here's just a basic outline of the pathway of the blood through the heart. So you're going to start again, you're going to go through your superior and inferior vena cava, and then it's going to move over into the 4 different chambers. Start moving into the 4 different chambers of the heart. You're going to go through your right atrium, through the tricuspid valve, through the right ventricle, through the pulmonary valve, all the way over to the lungs, and get through the arteries, the capillaries, the veins, over to the left atrium, the mitral valve, the left ventricle, the aortic valve, the aorta, and through the rest of the body. So here is just a better representation of what that is. So, like we said, we're going to start in our superior and our inferior vena cava. So the blood is going to enter through here, and it's going to go down, and it's going to pump all the way through the right atrium. And then all that pressure is going to open the tricuspid valve, and it's going to flow, and it's going to fill up this right ventricle. Once the right ventricle fills up, then it's going to open our pulmonary valve, and it's going to pump through. It's going to pump through all the way through the pulmonary artery, into the pulmonary veins, all the way through the left atrium, the left ventricle, through the mitral valve, and then it's going to fill up the left ventricle. Then it's going to go through the aortic valve and all the way through the aorta. Once it gets to the aorta, it's going to go through all these little valves right here to be able to pump it in all the different directions of the body. And so, as you can see here, you have some of your deoxygenated blood, which means that it has no oxygen. And then you have some of your oxygenated blood. So once it comes from the aorta, so all this in red is all the blood so far that's come from the aorta. And that's how blood flows through your entire body.